The morning light filtered through the hospital curtains as Kate sat beside William's bed, her fingers intertwined with his. 3 months had passed since the diagnosis, and the words still echoed in her mind like a broken record. Stage 4, pancreatic cancer. The doctors had been gentle but honest, 6 months, maybe 8 if they were lucky. William had taken the news with his characteristic quiet strength, squeezing her hand and whispering that they would face this together, just like everything else in their 27 years of marriage. Kate remembered the day they first met at the small coffee shop near the university library. She was 22, working part-time while finishing her degree in elementary education. William was 24, already established as a junior architect at a prestigious firm downtown. He had ordered the same thing every Tuesday for 3 weeks, a large black coffee and a blueberry muffin, before finally working up the courage to ask her name. She had smiled, wiping flour from her apron, and told him it was Kate. He had grinned back and said he was William, but his friends called him Bill. She had laughed and said she preferred William because it sounded more distinguished. Their courtship was slow and steady, built on long walks through the city park and quiet dinners at small restaurants where they could talk for hours. William was methodical in everything he did, from designing buildings to planning their future together. He proposed on a rainy Thursday evening in their tiny apartment, not because it was romantic, but because he said he couldn't wait another day to start their life together. Kate had said yes before he even finished asking the question. Now, as she watched the steady rise and fall of his chest, Kate tried to memorize every detail of his face. The laugh lines around his eyes had deepened over the years, carved there by countless shared jokes and moments of joy. His hair, once thick and dark brown, had turned silver at the temples, something she had always found distinguished and handsome. His hands, those careful architect's hands that had drawn blueprints for dozens of buildings and held her through every storm of their marriage, now seemed fragile against the white hospital sheets. The chemotherapy had been brutal. William, who had always been tall and lean, had lost 40 pounds in 2 months. His appetite disappeared completely, and even the smell of food made him nauseous. Kate had tried everything, making his favorite meals, bringing smoothies, even consulting with nutritionists, but nothing seemed to help. The man who had once carried her over the threshold of their first home now struggled to walk to the bathroom without assistance. They had no children, a source of quiet sadness that had followed them through the years. Not for lack of trying, but sometimes life simply doesn't unfold the way you plan. Instead, they had poured their love into their careers, their friends, and each other. William had designed 3 schools in their city, always saying that even though they didn't have children of their own, he could help create spaces where other people's children could learn and grow. Kate had taught 2nd grade for over 20 years, touching the lives of hundreds of students who still sent her cards and visited during holidays. The silence between them had grown heavier in recent weeks. Not the comfortable silence of a couple who had learned to communicate without words, but the weighted quiet of people who had too much to say and no idea how to begin. William had always been a man of few words, expressing his love through actions rather than lengthy declarations. But now, with time running out, Kate found herself desperate for the words they had never needed before. She had started keeping a journal, writing down all the things she wanted to remember about their life together. The way William hummed off key while making breakfast on Sunday mornings. How he always left her little notes in her lunch bag when she was having a particularly difficult week at school. The way he would reach for her hand automatically whenever they walked anywhere together. These small gestures had formed the foundation of their marriage, and Kate was terrified that without him, she would forget the details that made their love story unique. The hospital had become their second home. Kate had taken leave from teaching, something she had never imagined doing. But the thought of being anywhere else while William was fighting for his life seemed impossible. She had moved a small cot into his room, despite the nurse's gentle suggestions that she should go home and rest. Home felt empty without William's presence, and she couldn't bear the thought of him waking up alone and afraid. Dr. Martinez had been kind but realistic during their last conversation. The treatments weren't working as well as they had hoped. William's body was tired and the cancer was aggressive. They could continue with more intensive chemotherapy, but it would likely only add a few weeks to his life while making him much sicker. The other option was to focus on comfort care, making sure he was pain-free and surrounded by the people who loved him. William had listened to the options with the same quiet consideration he brought to every decision. Later that evening, when they were alone, he had taken Kate's hand and told her he was tired of fighting. Not tired of living, he clarified, but tired of the battle that was consuming what little time they had left. He wanted to spend his remaining weeks talking with her, sharing memories and finding a way to say goodbye that honored the beautiful life they had built together. That conversation had been a week ago, and since then, they had been existing in a strange limbo. The aggressive treatments had stopped, replaced by medications that kept William comfortable but alert. They had more time to talk now, but somehow found themselves saying less than ever. The weight of impending loss sat between them like a physical presence, making even simple conversations feel loaded with meaning and finality. Kate stood in the hospital corridor, holding 2 cups of coffee that had long since gone cold. Through the window of William's room, she could see him sleeping, finally peaceful after a difficult night. The pain medication made him drowsy, but it also gave him relief from the constant ache that had become his unwelcome companion. She had stepped out to make some phone calls, something she had been avoiding for days. Their closest friends, David and Linda Morrison, had been calling regularly since William's diagnosis. The 4 of them had shared countless dinners, vacations, and holidays together over the past 15 years. David and William had bonded over their shared love of old movies and terrible dad jokes, while Linda and Kate had developed a friendship, built on long walks and honest conversations about marriage, dreams, and the unexpected turns life could take. Linda had offered to visit multiple times, but Kate had politely declined, saying William needed rest. The truth was more complicated. Kate wasn't ready to see the shock and pity in her friends' eyes when they saw how much William had changed. She also wasn't prepared to have conversations about funeral arrangements or what she would do afterward. Those realities felt too enormous to face, let alone discuss with others. The phone call to William's brother Marcus had been particularly difficult. Marcus lived across the country with his wife and 3 teenagers, all deeply involved in school and activities. The brothers had maintained a close relationship despite the distance, talking every Sunday morning without fail for over a decade. Marcus had wanted to fly out immediately when he learned about the diagnosis, but William had asked him to wait, saying he wasn't ready for visits yet. Now, with time running shorter, Kate knew she needed to prepare Marcus for what he would see when he arrived. Marcus had listened quietly as Kate explained William's condition, his voice breaking only when she mentioned how thin his brother had become. He promised to arrange time off work and book a flight for the following week. Kate could hear him crying softly before he hung up, and she realized this might be the first time Marcus had truly understood that his older brother was dying. Back in William's room, Kate settled into the chair beside his bed and opened the photo album she had brought from home. She had spent the previous evening going through boxes of pictures, selecting images that captured the essence of their life together. There were photos from their early dating years, both of them looking impossibly young and carefree. Their wedding day was represented by a dozen pictures, including one of William feeding her cake with such tenderness that it still made her heart flutter. The album included snapshots from their various anniversaries, always celebrated quietly but meaningfully. William had surprised her for their 10th anniversary by recreating their first date, complete with a visit to the same coffee shop where they had met. For their 20th, they had taken a cruise to Alaska, something William had always wanted to do but had never mentioned until Kate surprised him with tickets. The photos from that trip showed them bundled up on deck, arms around each other as they watched glaciers calving into the sea. When William woke up, Kate showed him the album, and for the first time in weeks she saw him smile without any shadow of pain behind it. He pointed to a picture from their 5th anniversary, when they had attempted to go camping but ended up spending the night in a motel after their tent collapsed in a rainstorm. They had laughed until their sides hurt that night, and even now, the memory brought a chuckle from both of them. William's voice had grown weaker, but he managed to share memories that Kate had almost forgotten. He reminded her of the time she had tried to surprise him by painting their bedroom while he was away on a business trip, only to accidentally paint herself into a corner and have to call him for rescue advice. He talked about the morning he had found her crying over a student evaluation that had been particularly harsh, and how proud he had been when she decided to pursue her master's degree in education despite being in her 40s. As the afternoon wore on, William mentioned things he had never told her before. He confessed that he had been nervous about marrying her, not because he didn't love her, but because she was so vibrant and social while he was quiet and introverted. He had worried that she would eventually find him boring. Kate was stunned by this revelation, assuring him that his steadiness and thoughtfulness were exactly what had drawn her to him. She told him that in a world full of loud, demanding voices, his quiet strength had been her anchor. They talked about their decision not to pursue more aggressive fertility treatments after years of trying to have children. William admitted that, while he had grieved the family they hadn't been able to create, he had never regretted building a life centered around just the two of them. He said their love had been concentrated rather than divided, and he wouldn't trade the depth of their connection for anything. The conversation turned to practical matters as evening approached. William wanted to discuss his wishes for the service, something Kate had been dreading but knew was necessary. He preferred something simple and private, with just close friends and family. He had written letters for Marcus and a few other important people in their lives, and he asked Kate to make sure they received them after he was gone. Most importantly, William wanted to talk about Kate's future without him. This was the conversation she had been avoiding, the one that made his death feel real and imminent. He encouraged her to continue teaching, saying the children needed her passion and dedication. He suggested she might eventually want to travel to some of the places they had talked about visiting but never managed to see. He even gently brought up the possibility that she might one day find companionship again, though Kate couldn't imagine such a thing. The evening nurse, a kind woman named Janet who had become familiar with their routine, brought William's dinner and medications. He managed a few bites of soup and some crackers, more than he had eaten in days. Kate took this as a good sign, hope flickering in her chest despite everything she knew about his condition. As night settled over the hospital, William took Kate's hand and looked at her with an intensity that reminded her of their younger years. He told her that loving her had been the greatest accomplishment of his life, greater than any building he had designed or recognition he had received. He said that if he had to choose between 50 years with anyone else or their 27 years together, he would choose their life every single time. Kate finally found her voice to tell him things she had been carrying in her heart, but had never spoken aloud. She thanked him for making her feel beautiful every day of their marriage, even when she felt ordinary. She told him that his quiet love had taught her that true intimacy wasn't about grand gestures, but about showing up consistently for each other through all of life's seasons. Marcus arrived on a Thursday morning, looking older than Kate remembered despite having seen him just 6 months earlier at Christmas. The flight from Seattle had been turbulent, and he appeared tired and anxious as he made his way down the hospital corridor. Kate met him outside William's room, preparing him for the changes he would see in his brother. Nothing, however, could have fully prepared him for the reality of William's condition. The two brothers had always shared a remarkable resemblance, but now Marcus looked like a ghost image of what William had once been. While Marcus retained his healthy weight and color, William appeared almost translucent, his once broad shoulders now sharp angles beneath the hospital gown. The moment Marcus saw William, his composure crumbled. He had to step back into the hallway to collect himself before returning to his brother's bedside. William was awake and alert that morning, having had his best night's sleep in weeks. He greeted Marcus with a weak but genuine smile, joking that Marcus looked terrible and should probably get more sleep. This gentle teasing broke some of the tension in the room and allowed the brothers to fall into their familiar dynamic of affectionate ribbing and shared memories. Marcus had brought albums and videos from their childhood, things he had gathered hastily before leaving Seattle. The three of them spent hours looking through pictures of family vacations, school plays, and sporting events. William laughed as Marcus reminded him of the time they had tried to build a treehouse without any planning or proper tools, resulting in a crooked platform that could barely hold their combined weight. Kate learned stories about William's youth that he had never shared, including his brief but intense phase of wanting to become a professional baseball player before discovering his love for architecture. The brothers talked about their parents, both deceased for over a decade now. They shared memories of their father's terrible cooking experiments after their mother passed away, and how he had eventually mastered exactly 3 meals that he rotated endlessly. William told Marcus about a dream he had been having recently, where their parents were waiting for him in the house where they had grown up, and everything was exactly as it had been during their childhood summers. Marcus stayed for 5 days, and during that time, Kate watched the brothers work through years of unspoken feelings and regrets. They talked about the distance that geography had created between them, and both expressed wishes that they had made more effort to see each other regularly. Marcus apologized for missing William's 50th birthday party due to work commitments, something that had hurt William more than he had ever admitted. William in turn acknowledged that he had sometimes been jealous of Marcus's family life, though he had never wanted children at the expense of what he had with Kate. On Marcus's last full day, the brothers asked Kate to give them some private time together. She spent the afternoon in the hospital garden, a small but peaceful space where she had been walking regularly to clear her head. When she returned, both men had been crying, though they tried to hide it. Marcus later told her that William had asked him to look after Kate from a distance, not to intrude on her independence, but to make sure she wasn't completely alone in the world. The night before Marcus's departure, William's condition took a noticeable turn. His breathing became more labored, and the pain seemed to intensify despite the medication. Dr. Martinez explained that this was part of the disease's progression, and they adjusted his care to focus entirely on comfort. The timeline that had once been measured in weeks was now being discussed in days. Marcus postponed his flight, calling his wife to explain that he couldn't leave yet. Kate was grateful for his presence, as the reality of William's approaching death became impossible to deny. The 3 of them maintained a constant vigil, taking turns reading to William from his favorite books and playing the classical music he had always loved. During one of William's more lucid moments, he asked Kate to help him write a letter to her, something he could leave behind for her to read when she was ready. His handwriting had become shaky, so he dictated while she wrote in his careful architect's script. The letter was full of practical advice mixed with profound expressions of love. He reminded her to change the air filters in their house every 3 months, to call the plumber about the kitchen faucet that had been dripping, and to make sure she continued getting regular medical checkups. More importantly, the letter contained William's hopes for Kate's future. He wanted her to travel to Ireland, something she had always talked about but they had never managed to do together. He encouraged her to take the art classes she had mentioned wanting to try, and to perhaps consider adopting a pet for companionship. He wrote that their love story would continue even after his death, because the way she lived her life would be a reflection of how deeply she had been loved. The letter also contained specific instructions for their anniversary dates, which fell just 3 months away. William wanted Kate to visit their favorite restaurant and order his usual meal along with hers. He wanted her to toast to their love, and to remember that their marriage had been perfect, not because it was without challenges, but because they had faced every challenge together. As William's strength continued to fade, conversations became shorter but somehow more intense. He would squeeze Kate's hand to communicate when words became too difficult. She learned to read the subtle changes in his expression, understanding when he needed more pain medication and when he simply needed her presence. The hospital staff had become like family during their extended stay. Janet, the evening nurse, would sit with Kate during her breaks, sharing stories about other couples she had cared for, and gently preparing Kate for what the final stages might look like. Dr. Martinez checked on William several times each day, always taking time to answer Kate's questions honestly, while maintaining hope for William's comfort. Marcus proved to be an unexpected source of strength during these final days. Despite his own grief, he took care of practical matters that Kate couldn't manage. He fielded phone calls from concerned friends, arranged for meal deliveries, and even contacted Kate's principal to extend her leave of absence. His presence allowed Kate to focus entirely on William without worrying about the outside world. On what would be William's last coherent day, he managed to tell both Kate and Marcus that he was ready to let go. He had fought as long and as hard as he could, but he was tired and the pain was becoming overwhelming despite the medication. He thanked Marcus for coming and for being the best brother anyone could ask for. He told Kate that she had made every day of his life better just by being in it, and that he would wait for her wherever people go when they die. That evening, surrounded by the soft glow of bedside lamps and the quiet hum of medical equipment, William slipped into a peaceful sleep that would be his last conscious moments. Kate and Marcus settled in for what they sensed would be their final night together as a family of three. The final hours came quietly, without the dramatic urgency that movies had taught Kate to expect. William's breathing grew gradually slower and more shallow throughout the night, while Kate held his hand and Marcus dozed fitfully in the chair by the window. The monitors that had become the soundtrack to their lives now showed readings that everyone understood, meant the end was approaching. Dr. Martinez arrived at dawn, checking William's vital signs with the gentle efficiency Kate had come to appreciate. She explained that William was in the active dying process, likely unaware of any discomfort, and that his hearing would be the last sense to fade. She encouraged Kate and Marcus to continue talking to him, sharing memories and expressions of love that he might still be able to hear, even if he couldn't respond. Kate found herself talking more than she had in weeks, filling the quiet room with stories about their life together. She reminded William about their first apartment, barely large enough for two people but perfect because they were young and in love. She talked about the night he had surprised her by learning to cook, her grandmother's recipe for apple pie, spending weeks practicing in secret until he could make it perfectly. She described their weekend trips to antique shops where William would patiently follow her around while she examined old furniture and vintage books. Marcus shared memories from a different perspective, telling stories about the big brother, who had taught him to ride a bike and helped him through his first heartbreak. He talked about family Christmases when William would spend hours assembling complicated toys for Marcus's children, never showing frustration, even when the instructions were unclear or pieces were missing. He reminded William about their tradition of calling each other on their birthdays no matter what else was happening in their lives. The room filled with a strange sense of peace as the morning progressed. Kate realized that despite the sadness of losing William, there was also a profound sense of completion to their story. They had loved each other deeply and faithfully for 27 years. They had built a life together based on respect, kindness, and genuine friendship. Most people never experience this kind of love, and Kate felt grateful even through her grief. Janet arrived for her shift early, having asked to be present during William's final hours. She had grown fond of the couple during their long stay, often commenting on the obvious love between them, and the way they continued to care for each other even under the most difficult circumstances. She brought coffee for Kate and Marcus and fresh flowers for William's bedside table, saying that everyone deserved beauty around them when they were transitioning. Around 10 in the morning, William's breathing pattern changed noticeably. The spaces between breaths grew longer, and Kate could feel his hand growing cooler in hers. She leaned close to his ear and whispered all the things she hoped he could still hear. She told him how proud she was to have been his wife, how grateful she felt for every day they had shared, and how she would carry his love with her for the rest of her life. Marcus stood on the other side of the bed, his own hand resting on William's shoulder. He told his brother that he had been the best man he knew, someone who had lived his life with integrity and kindness. He promised to check on Kate regularly and to make sure she knew she always had family who cared about her. He thanked William for being not just a brother but a role model and friend. The actual moment of death was so gentle that Kate almost missed it. One moment William was breathing, slowly and peacefully, and the next moment he simply wasn't. There was no struggle, no dramatic final breath, just a quiet transition from life to whatever comes after. The monitors showed flat lines, but the room felt full of love and peace rather than tragedy. Kate sat quietly for several minutes, still holding William's hand, trying to absorb the reality that her husband was gone. Marcus moved to stand behind her chair, his hands on her shoulders providing support without words. Janet checked the monitors and quietly turned them off, eliminating the mechanical sounds that had become so familiar over the past months. Dr. Martinez arrived within minutes, having been alerted by the nursing staff. She confirmed what everyone already knew, recording the time of death as 10:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in early spring. She expressed her condolences to both Kate and Marcus, mentioning how rare it was to see a couple face such a difficult journey with such grace and love. She assured them that William's death had been peaceful and that he likely experienced no discomfort in his final moments. The next few hours passed in a blur of necessary activities. Kate signed papers and answered questions about funeral arrangements while Marcus handled phone calls to notify other family members and close friends. The funeral home that William had chosen was contacted, and arrangements were made for his body to be transported later that afternoon. Kate spent a final hour alone with William, talking to him as if he could still hear her. She told him about the plans she and Marcus had discussed for the memorial service, assuring him that it would be exactly what he had wanted, small, personal, and focused on celebrating his life rather than mourning his death. She described the readings she had chosen and the music they would play, all pieces that had been meaningful to their relationship. She also made promises about her own future, commitments she knew William would want her to keep. She promised to continue living fully rather than just existing in his absence. She vowed to maintain the friendships they had built together and to create new connections that would help her build a life without him. Most importantly, she promised to remember their love as a gift that had transformed her rather than as something that had been taken away. Before leaving the hospital room for the last time, Kate carefully removed her wedding ring and placed it on William's finger alongside his own ring. She wanted them to stay together even in death, and this small gesture felt like the final act of their earthly marriage. She kissed his forehead one last time, whispering goodbye to the man who had been her partner, best friend, and greatest love. Marcus helped her gather their personal belongings, the photo albums, letters, and small items that had made the sterile hospital room feel more like home over the past weeks. As they walked through the corridors where they had spent so many days and nights, Kate felt herself saying goodbye not just to William, but to this chapter of their lives that had been defined by illness and impending loss. The drive home was quiet, both Kate and Marcus lost in their own thoughts and memories. The house felt different when they arrived, no longer a place they were visiting between hospital stays, but a home that Kate would now inhabit alone. The silence was profound, but it wasn't empty. The rooms were filled with 27 years of shared memories, and Kate realized that while William was gone, the life they had built together would continue to surround and comfort her. The funeral took place on a Thursday morning at the small chapel where Kate and William had been married 27 years earlier. Kate had chosen this location not for religious reasons, but because it held the memory of their happiest day together. The same stained glass windows that had cast colored light across their wedding ceremony now illuminated the simple casket where William lay surrounded by white roses, his favorite flower. Marcus had stayed an additional week to help Kate with the arrangements and to provide support during the service. Together they had crafted a ceremony that reflected William's quiet dignity and their deep love for each other. Instead of a traditional funeral with formal eulogies, they had created a celebration of life where friends and family could share memories and stories about the man who had touched their lives so gently but profoundly. David and Linda Morrison arrived early, their faces showing the shock that comes with losing someone who had seemed like a permanent fixture in their lives. They had known William was ill, but seeing Kate as a widow rather than half of a devoted couple made his death feel real in a way that phone calls and updates hadn't accomplished. Linda embraced Kate for a long moment, both women crying quietly as they held each other. William's colleagues from the architectural firm attended, including his longtime partner James, who spoke briefly about William's dedication to creating beautiful, functional spaces for children. He mentioned the 3 schools William had designed, all of which were still serving their communities and would stand as lasting monuments to his careful craftsmanship and attention to detail. Several of Kate's former students, now grown adults, with families of their own, came to pay their respects. They remembered William from school events and parent-teacher conferences, describing him as the quiet man who always stood slightly behind Kate, but whose pride in her work was obvious to everyone who saw them together. One former student, now a teacher herself, mentioned that William had been the one who encouraged her to pursue education as a career when she had met him at a chance encounter years after graduation. The service included readings from William's favorite poetry, selections that Kate and Marcus had chosen together from the books he had loved. Marcus read from Robert Frost, while Linda shared a passage from Mary Oliver that spoke about love persisting beyond physical presence. Kate herself read the letter that William had dictated to her in the hospital, the one filled with practical advice and profound expressions of love. Her voice remained steady throughout, though tears flowed freely down her cheeks. The most moving moment came when Kate spoke about their marriage without notes or preparation, simply sharing what was in her heart. She talked about William's quiet strength, his terrible sense of humor that had made her laugh for over 2 decades, and his ability to make her feel like the most important person in the world through simple daily acts of love and consideration. She described their relationship as a conversation that had lasted 27 years, full of comfortable silences and deep understanding. After the service, friends and family gathered at Kate and William's home for a meal that Linda and David had organized. The house filled with gentle conversation and shared memories, creating an atmosphere of love rather than mourning. Kate moved through the gathering like someone in a dream, accepting condolences and sharing stories while part of her remained, detached, still not fully believing that this was her new reality. Marcus proved invaluable during this time, handling logistics and helping Kate navigate the overwhelming number of decisions that follow a death. Together they sorted through William's personal belongings, keeping items that held special meaning and donating clothes and books to local charities. Kate was surprised by how many small notes and cards she found among William's things. Anniversary cards she had given him, love notes from their early marriage, and even grocery lists written in her handwriting that he had apparently kept as mementos. The most difficult task was going through William's office, where his architectural drawings and project files created a visual history of his professional life. Kate found sketches for a house he had never mentioned, plans drawn with careful detail that she realized were his vision of their dream retirement home. The discovery broke her heart in a new way, representing not just what they had lost, but what they would never have the chance to build together. 3 weeks after the funeral, Marcus finally returned to Seattle, leaving Kate alone in the house for the first time since William's diagnosis. The silence was overwhelming, punctuated only by the familiar sounds of the house settling and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Kate found herself talking aloud to William, sharing the small details of her day, as she had always done when he returned from work. Sleep became elusive, not because their bed felt empty, but because the entire rhythm of her life had been disrupted. She had grown accustomed to the hospital routine, the constant presence of medical staff, and the shared vigilance over William's condition. Now, without that structure, she felt lost and purposeless. The quiet house that had once been their sanctuary now felt more like a museum of their past life together. Kate began establishing new routines to anchor her days. She walked through the neighborhood each morning, something she and William had done together for years. She continued to shop at the same grocery store, though she struggled to remember how to cook for one person after decades of preparing meals for 2. Simple tasks like doing laundry or watching television felt strange when they were no longer shared activities. Letters and cards continued to arrive from friends, colleagues, and family members who had heard about William's death. Each one brought both comfort and fresh waves of grief, as people shared memories Kate had never heard or perspectives on their marriage that she hadn't considered. Several people mentioned how obvious their love had been to everyone around them, describing them as a couple who had seemed genuinely happy together in a way that was rare and inspiring. One letter particularly moved Kate. It came from a young couple who had worked with William on their first home design several years earlier. They wrote about how William had listened carefully to their dreams and concerns, creating a house that perfectly reflected their needs and personalities. But what they remembered most was the way he had talked about Kate during their meetings. mentioning her opinions on various design elements and clearly valuing her input, even when she wasn't present. They said his obvious love and respect for his wife had given them a model for the kind of marriage they wanted to build. As the first month without William passed, Kate began to understand that grief was not a problem to be solved, but a new landscape she would learn to navigate. Some days were easier than others, and she couldn't predict what would trigger the most intense waves of sadness. The sight of William's coffee mug in the dishwasher could bring tears, while sorting through major financial documents felt manageable and practical. Kate also began to recognize that her love for William hadn't ended with his death. Instead, it had transformed into something that would accompany her forward rather than anchor her to the past. The daily expressions of their love, the conversations, shared meals, and physical affection, were gone. But the foundation they had built together remained solid beneath her feet, supporting her as she learned to live as a widow rather than a wife. 6 months after William's death, Kate stood in their bedroom holding the suitcase she had retrieved from the closet for the first time since their last vacation together. The decision to travel to Ireland had not come easily, but as their anniversary approached, she felt drawn to honor William's wishes for her future. The trip he had mentioned in his letter had seemed impossible in the early weeks of grief, but now it felt like a necessary step toward building a life that honored their love while embracing her independence. Marcus had offered to accompany her, but Kate declined, knowing this journey needed to be hers alone. She had, however, accepted his help with the practical arrangements, as planning travel still felt overwhelming when combined with the ongoing process of settling William's affairs and adjusting to widowhood. The months since William's death had been filled with unexpected discoveries about herself. Kate had learned that she was stronger than she had realized, capable of handling household repairs, financial decisions, and social situations that William had traditionally managed. She had also discovered that her capacity for loneliness was deeper than she had imagined, and that missing someone could be a physical ache that never completely disappeared. Returning to teaching had provided both structure and purpose to her days. Her students had welcomed her back with handmade cards and gentle hugs, their innocence and energy serving as a reminder that life continued to unfold with beauty and possibility, even in the midst of loss. Kate found that focusing on their educational needs gave her a break from her own grief, while connecting her to the larger community that William had always encouraged her to serve. The principal, Mrs. Henderson, had been understanding about Kate's need for flexibility as she adjusted to her new circumstances. Some days were harder than others, and Kate appreciated being able to step out of the classroom when memories of William threatened to overwhelm her during school hours. Her colleagues had rallied around her with quiet support, covering her duties when needed and including her in social activities, without making her feel pressured to participate. One of the most healing aspects of returning to work was discovering that her experience with loss had made her a more compassionate teacher. When 8-year-old Sophie struggled with her parents' divorce, Kate found herself uniquely qualified to help the child process difficult emotions. When Marcus, named after William's brother though no relation, acted out after his grandmother's death, Kate was able to provide the patience and understanding that comes from personal experience with grief. The house had gradually transformed from a shrine to their marriage into a home where Kate could live comfortably alone. She had rearranged furniture to better suit her solitary lifestyle, converting William's office into a reading room where she could grade papers and pursue the art classes he had encouraged her to try. The walls still displayed photos of their life together, but she had added new images, pictures from school events, artwork from her students, and photos from the few social outings she had begun to accept. Kate had also begun hosting small gatherings for friends, something she and William had done regularly but which had seemed impossible in the early months of widowhood. David and Linda were frequent visitors, and their continued friendship had become a bridge between Kate's married life and her new identity as a single woman. They were careful not to treat her as a charity case, instead including her in normal, social activities and conversations that weren't centered around her loss. The Ireland trip represented a significant milestone in Kate's healing journey. She had planned to visit the places William had researched during his last weeks, when he had become fascinated with Irish architecture and had spoken about the buildings they might see together. Now she would see them alone, but she would experience them through the lens of their shared interests and his recommendations. Packing for the trip brought its own emotional challenges. Kate found herself automatically folding clothes for two, before remembering that she was traveling alone. She carefully packed the small wooden box containing some of William's ashes, planning to scatter them in a place that felt meaningful during her travels. The funeral director had prepared several small containers, allowing Kate to keep most of William's remains while taking a portion with her on this symbolic journey. The night before her departure, Kate sat in their garden with a cup of tea, surrounded by the flowers William had planted over the years. The roses he had tended so carefully were blooming magnificently, and she took comfort in the continuity of the natural world. The garden would continue to grow and change, just as she was learning to grow and change, carrying the best of their shared past into an uncertain but hopeful future. Kate had written a letter to William, something she had begun doing regularly, as a way of processing her thoughts and maintaining their connection. In this letter, she told him about her plans for Ireland, her nervousness about traveling alone, and her gratitude for the love that continued to sustain her even in his absence. She wrote about the ways their marriage had prepared her for independence, how his quiet confidence in her abilities was helping her discover her own strength. The final entry in the letter addressed the most difficult aspect of moving forward: the possibility that her life might someday include new relationships and experiences that didn't center around their marriage. Kate acknowledged that she wasn't ready for romantic companionship, but she was beginning to understand that loving William completely didn't require her to stop living fully. Instead, their love had equipped her with the capacity for joy, connection, and adventure that would serve her well in whatever future awaited her. As Kate prepared for bed on her last night in the house before the trip, she felt William's presence not as a ghost or supernatural phenomenon, but as the living legacy of their years together. His influence shaped her decisions, his love continued to comfort her during difficult moments, and his encouragement pushed her toward experiences and growth that honored both their shared past and her individual future. The Ireland trip would be Kate's first major step toward building a life that was fully her own, while remaining rooted in the love she and William had cultivated together. She was no longer the woman who had sat beside his hospital bed, paralyzed by the prospect of life without him. Instead, she was becoming someone new: a widow, a teacher, an independent traveler, and most importantly, a woman who had been transformed by love and was learning to carry that transformation forward into an unknown but promising future. The suitcase sat by the front door, ready for the morning journey that would mark 6 months since William's death and the beginning of whatever came next in Kate's story. She had survived the worst loss she could imagine, and while the grief would always be part of her, it no longer defined the boundaries of her world. Tomorrow she would board a plane to Ireland, carrying William's memory and love with her as she stepped boldly into the rest of her life.